Streaming. All right. Welcome back to day 8 of The Extraordinary Life of Abdu'l-Bahá, presented by Violetta Zane. This was a collaborative effort by the Clearwater Bahá'ís, by Firm Foundation and Academy, and Desert Rose Baha'i Institute. So take it away, Violetta.
Okay, so yesterday was quite an exciting, eventful day for us because we looked at Abdu'l-Bahá's departure from the Holy Land for the first time in 40 years, except for his visit to Beirut, and his arrival in Egypt, his first visit to France and Switzerland, his visit to England, where he spoke publicly for the first time, and his return to France, and the story of our beloved Paris talks. And so I teased a little bit about what was going to happen today. And we are going to start today with Abdu'l-Bahá's sailing journey to the United States and why Shoghi Effendi did not make it to America with Abdu'l-Bahá. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And The Extraordinary Life of Abdu'l-Bahá, Part 6. This is the second leg of Abdu'l-Bahá's journeys to the West. It's his journeys to the United States and Canada in 1912. This part covers the life of Abdu'l-Bahá at the age of 68 in 1912. So there is on the website a slideshow of Abdu'l-Bahá's newspaper coverage in America. And this was done with the help of the archives of the United States, and is something that you can visit at your own convenience. And I'm starting with a sentence from the book Abdu'l-Bahá in New York, page 36, from Hélène Lacroix Hobson, which gives us a good idea of the purpose of Abdu'l-Bahá going to the United States. The primary purpose of Abdu'l-Bahá's journey to America was to officially proclaim his station as center of the covenant, to rally the unity of the Baha'i community, and to establish the strong foundation of love and integrity upon which the future of the faith of Baha'u'llah would stand and progress. Again, we have this map which you can visit of every place he set foot that we know of. And we begin in Naples, Italy, between the 28th and the 30th of March, 1912. But before we get into that, I have to give a little bit of historical background. And this is a collage of the Italo-Turkish War, the war between Turkey and Italy, which lasted between the 29th of September, 1911, until the 18th of October, 1912. So Abdu'l-Bahá arrives in Italy in the middle of their war with Turks. So Abdu'l-Bahá will only see Naples, one of the largest and most important cities and ports in Italy, from the dock. It appears on the horizon, and Abdu'l-Bahá docks in Italy at a very sensitive political time in the country's history. Abdu'l-Bahá is dressed in Eastern garb, and is accompanied by friends who wear fezzes, those flat top Eastern hats. Abdu'l-Bahá comes from an Ottoman city, Acre, and he arrives in the middle of this Italian-Turkish war, and so for them, he would have been Turkish. So when he arrives in Naples, this is a view of Naples from the port, hand-colored. The animosity between the Ottomans and the Italians at this time is so intense that Ottomans living in Italy, or Italians living in the Ottoman Empire, are attacked by the population. Accordingly, Abdu'l-Bahá is strongly encouraged and urged to stay aboard the Cedric and not disembark in Naples for fear of inciting a violent reaction on the part of the inhabitants. Abdu'l-Bahá consents and stays on board, observing the city, its gardens and buildings from aboard the Cedric. Now we come to the crux of this story on the 29th of March, one day after they arrive aboard the Cedric, where Shoghi Effendi is cruelly and unjustly turned back. At Naples, 6 Western Baha'is board the Cedric: Mr. Woodcock of Canada and his wife and daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Page of Denver, and Miss Louisa Matthew of London, Louis Gregory's future wife. Along with them, a group of Italian physicians boards the ship to inspect the passengers' eyes. The ship's doctor has already given his opinion about the infection in the eyes of Agha Khusrau. But when those physicians examine the rest of the passengers, they declare that the eyes of Shoghi Effendi and Mirza Munir Zain are also infected and that they must leave the ship. But this does not just happen in a vacuum. Dr. Aminullah Farid, the nephew of Munir Khanum, has already started down an ambitious path of ego-driven family intrigues, and that will lead him eventually to covenant breaking. He was the one who suggests to Italian authorities that the Baha'i Party are Ottomans, with whom the Italians are at war. When the Italian doctors misdiagnose Shoghi Effendi and Mirza Munir Zain, Dr. Farid insists they must be sent back and raises all kinds of arguments in support of the Italian doctor's diagnosis. The next day, on the 30th of March, 1912, a saddened grandfather and a broken-hearted grandson. These are 2 pictures of Abdu'l-Bahá and Shoghi Effendi around the time that this takes place. Abdu'l-Bahá pleads for an entire day, and his companions and the American friends also plead, but to no avail. The Italian doctors insist that if the 3 friends continued their journey to New York, they would be turned back once they arrived in America. Abdu'l-Bahá has no choice but to ask Shoghi Effendi, Agha Khusrau, and Mirza Munir Zain to obey and disembark, but not before bestowing on them his utmost blessings and bidding them farewell. Shoghi Effendi would later attest to his wife, Ruhiya Khanum, that there was nothing wrong with his eyes at the time, as he had always had very strong eyes. The machinations of Dr. Farid are cruel, and it is painful to imagine the heartbreak of Shoghi Effendi, a 15-year-old boy, about to embark on the very great first adventure of his life with his beloved grandfather, when his dreams are shattered 2 days into the voyage. In 1912, this was an extraordinary opportunity. Journeys like this to America from the Middle East were so incredibly rare and eventful, and Shoghi Effendi had been so excited about the large ship and his cabin. But it is not just Shoghi Effendi who was affected by this episode. Abdu'l-Bahá is greatly grieved and saddened by the event, but stays quiet. He has at all costs to protect the secret of Shoghi Effendi's future destiny from being revealed. Worse problems could ensue should envious people and jealous ones find out that Shoghi Effendi is to succeed Abdu'l-Bahá. And a fate far worse than being turned back from a steamship could ensue. Abdu'l-Bahá says on the evening of 30 March 1912 to his friends something very telling. These Italians thought we were Turks, and they reported us as such. They have stopped 3 of us. 1 was the secretary and 1 was the cook. This was not important. But this child, Shoghi Effendi, was helpless. Why were they so strict with him? They have ill-treated us in this way, but I have always given support and assistance to their community, whether in Alexandria or in Haifa. Dr. Farid will make Abdu'l-Bahā's life a living nightmare, and Shoghi Effendi later in his life will have no doubt that Dr. Farid was the one who prevented him from embarking on this journey. In fact, on December 5th, 1913, when Abdu'l-Bahá finally returns home, he immediately heads to his wife Munir Khanum's room, sits down, and gestures in a feeble voice, "Dr. Farid has ground me down." Six months later, Shoghi Effendi will write a letter to one of the secretaries of Abdu'l-Bahá, telling him that although he has subscribed to Star of the West, some copies have not arrived. And would he please make sure that he gets every single copy of the reports of his grandfather's travels in America? This is a marvelous book that will take you aboard the Cedric as Mirza Mahmud Zarqani here on the left, takes assiduous notes of the journey. It's called Mahmud's Diary, chronicling Abdu'l-Bahā's journey to America. And volume 2 will soon be published. The United States, 11th of April to 29th of August, 1912. This is the first leg of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey to the United States before going to Canada. And Abdu'l-Bahā, of course, begins in April, on the 11th of April, 1912, in New York City, Abdu'l-Bahā and the Statue of Liberty. The Cedric sails into Upper New York Bay. As Abdu'l-Bahā catches his first glimpses of the skyline of New York City, reporters climb aboard the tugboat, which will drag the steamship into safe harbor. They find Abdu'l-Bahā on the upper deck, standing where he can see the pilot of the ship, his long robe flowing in the wind. Abdu'l-Bahā's first words to America, quote, Baha'u'llah, and are about the press. This is Abdu'l-Bahā quoted in Alan Ward, 239 Days. The pages of swiftly appearing newspapers are indeed the mirror of the world, but it behooveth the editors of the newspapers to be sanctified from the prejudice of egotism and desire, and to be adorned with the ornament of equity and justice. When the Cedric is abreast of the Statue of Liberty, Abdu'l-Bahā, standing straight and facing it, holds his arms wide apart in salutation and says, there is the world's symbol of liberty and freedom. After being 40 years a prisoner, I can tell you that freedom is not a matter of place. It is a condition. Unless one accepts dire vicissitudes, he will not attain. When one is released from the prison of self, that indeed is a release. As the ship points its nose up the North River, Abdu'l-Bahā glimpses the skyline of New York City. And this, my friends, is the skyline of New York City in 1912 that Abdu'l-Bahā laid his eyes on. He looks at the skyscrapers and tells the reporter, these are the minarets of Western world commerce and industry. Abdu'l-Bahā arrives at Ellis Island, and the manifest of this is Ellis Island in 1905, just about how Abdu'l-Bahā would have seen it. And then when he arrives, Abdu'l-Bahā's name is filled in the ship's manifest. Hold on. On line 8, Abdu'l-Bahā Abbas, occupation, author, can read and write, yes and yes. Nationality, Persian. Race or people, Persian. Last permanent residence, Egypt, Ramleh. Name of the address of nearest relative, Ramleh, Egypt. Final destination. I can't read that. And then the next page on line 8 says, whether having a ticket to such and such final destination, no, not yet. By whom was passage paid? By self. Were you ever before in the United States? No. Whether going to a journey to a relative or friend, and if so, what relative? And he says in parentheses, touring. And so all of these are no, no, no. Height, 5.5 feet. Hair, gray. Eyes, blue. Marks of identification, none. And I really find this interesting. So yes, and so place of birth, Persia, and city or town, Tehran. This was in the complete, in the listing of Ellis Island, actually, in the archives of Ellis Island. But the Brent Poirier was kind enough to provide me with these highest quality scans. So these are some of the headlines showing Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival. And finally, when Abdu'l-Bahá arrives in New York City, he meets up with Juliet Thompson, with who he was in France in 1911. She's one of his most enkindled followers. You see her here on the left. And the other person that we're going to be talking about here is Percy Stickney Grant. Percy S. Grant, with whom she's in love. They have a platonic relationship that they have for many years, but Grant is not a serious man. And when he arrives he hears that Abdu'l-Bahá is arriving in New York, Grant writes Juliet a letter and requests that his first public address take place at his own Church of the Ascension on Easter Sunday, the 14th. But Percy Grant is a hypocrite, and he has denounced Juliet's faith from the pulpit before and badmouthed the subtle Machiavellian Orient. But he wants the attention, and he enthusiastically offers his pulpit to Abdu'l-Bahá for his first public address in the United States. Here on the left, you have the Church of the Ascension, where Abdu'l-Bahá will speak in 1910, 1914. And on the right is the original interior of the church as Abdu'l-Bahá would have seen it. So on April 14th, 3 days after arriving, Abdu'l-Bahá enters the church from a special side door that opens into the vestry room, and he rests for a while. And as the clergymen come to express their gratitude for his presence, Percy has organized an elaborate ceremony where the Persian Baha'is, Edward Getzinger and Juliet Thompson, bring up the rear of the professional. The altar and chancel are completely banked with white calla lilies, and hanging on the back of the bishop's chair is an exact reproduction of a classical Greek victor's wreath of laurel leaves. Dr. Grant reads a prophecy and then heads to the vestry to get Abdu'l-Bahá. As they walk back in, the choir begins to sing a hymnal, Jesus Lives. And Dr. Grant takes Abdu'l-Bahá to the bishop's chair, breaking a canon of the Episcopal Church, which forbids the unbaptized to sit behind the altar. But he allows Abdu'l-Bahá nonetheless to sit behind the altar. Then Dr. Grant asks Abdu'l-Bahá to give a benediction, and the master lifts his face up in prayer, eyes closed, the palms of his hands uplifted, and Percy Grant's head is bowed low. Clergymen kneel on either side of him, and Abdu'l-Bahá chants a prayer. And then the recessional hymn is Christ our Lord has risen again. The next morning, Abdu'l-Bahá telephones for Juliet to come at once to him. He immediately starts speaking appreciatively of the service Percy Grant organized, but cautions Juliet and her relationship with him and says, "You must keep your acquaintance, Juliet, absolutely formal." Percy Grant will never marry Juliet and eventually resigns from his rectorship. This is an article about Abdu'l-Bahá at the Episcopal Church. There are so many articles to read, I cannot read them all, but I will read the first couple of lines. Garbed in the white robe and tarbush of Oriental priesthood, Abdu'l-Bahá, son of the founder of the Baha'i cult, preached a message of religious unity and universal peace from the pulpit of the Protestant Episcopal Church of the Ascension at 5th Avenue and 10th Street yesterday morning. Following his sermon, he stood at the altar facing the east after the manner of the sun worshippers and offered a prayer in Persian, says the New York Herald. These are really wonderful articles to read because they're kind of cute, you know? They don't always understand everything that they're writing about. You sense the feeling of like they have to get this to press right away. This is quite an extraordinary story. It's the story of Kahlil Gibran and Abdu'l-Bahá, and it starts with 51 10th Street, where Kahlil Gibran lives. This is it right here. Right across from Juliet Thompson, who lives at 48th West 10th Street. And Juliet Thompson and Kahlil Gibran are both artists, and that's how they meet. Kahlil Gibran will say that Juliet was his first friend in New York, and they will be close for decades. Juliet tells Gibran about the face immediately, and he listens. He finds a way to get copies of Baha'u'llah's Arabic writings and says it's the most stupendous literature ever written, that no Arabic even touches the Arabic of Baha'u'llah. Then on the 19th of April, 1912, 8 days after Abdu'l-Bahá arrives, Juliet tells Kahlil Gibran that Abdu'l-Bahá, the son of Baha'u'llah, is actually coming to New York. So Abdu'l-Bahá gives Kahlil Gibran 1 hour on the 19th of April, 1912, at 6:30 in the morning, and Kahlil Gibran makes this pencil drawing of Abdu'l-Bahá, this very beautiful sketch of Abdu'l-Bahá. That's what he did on the 19th of April. And he would say of Abdu'l-Bahá, from the first time I saw him, I saw form noble enough to be a receptacle for the Holy Spirit. This, Kahlil Gibran will always love Abdu'l-Bahá, but he will never really understand his station fully. The station of Abdu'l-Bahá is a mystery that can be attained only with prayer. And of course, 7 years later, Kahlil Gibran is still involved with the Baha'is. And this is just a photo montage that shows that on March 26, 1921, he gave a talk with the Baha'is at St. Mark's in the Bowery. So he just remains really close to the faith and really loves the person of Abdu'l-Bahá. So this is the Hotel Ansonia on Broadway in Amsterdam in 1905, very shortly before Abdu'l-Bahá comes and stays here. This is where Abdu'l-Bahá is staying when a journalist named Kate Carew comes and interviews him. She is very famous. She's profiled Mark Twain, Sarah Bernhardt, J.P. Morgan, Pablo Picasso, Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, the Wright brothers, and now Abdu'l-Bahá. And her article is further down in the chronology, and it's really kind of written in that, like, I'm a cool, hip New York woman of 1912 kind of like, sort of like informal way of speaking. I mean, it's really interesting. It's fascinating. So she comes and they speak about material civilization and gender issues, but she notices Abdu'l-Bahá is tired, and that's always a trap for everybody, because as soon as she asks Dr. Farid, his interpreter, if she should leave, oh no, Abdu'l-Bahá has been giving himself for 11 hours, but he's just beginning. So this is the day where he sat for Kahlil Gibran at 6 in the morning, and he's been giving interviews all day for 11 hours. Then Kate Carew arrives, and Abdu'l-Bahá says to her, instead of, no, I'm done for the day, I'm going to go take a nap. No, Abdu'l-Bahá would never say that. Abdu'l-Bahá says, I am going to the poor in the Bowery now. I love them. And these people are the poor in the Bowery in 1910. It is quite possible that at least one man from this whole long line would be there 2 years later when Abdu'l-Bahá comes. They are waiting in a bread line. These are the poor of the poor. So Kate Carew joins Abdu'l-Bahá and the rest of the party, and they head to the Bowery Mission, 8 kilometers and an entire world away from the Ansonia Hotel. This is one of these things I was telling you about yesterday, where Abdu'l-Bahá will have a very eminent visitor, in this case, Kate Carew. And immediately after this eminent visitor, Abdu'l-Bahá does something very practical. Like in Paris, he met this very eminent scholar and immediately went to see the Ponsonnaille family in the slum in Paris. And now he has met Kate Carew, who's interviewed Winston Churchill and Picasso, and he takes her with him to the Bowery to feed the homeless and to feed the hungry. So this story between Abdu'l-Bahá and the men of the Bowery is quite lovely. This is a photograph courtesy of the Byron Company, the inside of the Bowery mission where Abdu'l-Bahá is going to speak in 1897. So once they enter the mission, Juliet Thompson and Edward Getzinger have two huge white bag of quarters that Abdu'l-Bahá has asked them to go and get from the bank. They have these large bags of quarters, and they sit behind Abdu'l-Bahá on the platform. After a brief introduction, Abdu'l-Bahá begins speaking to the 400 men. And Abdu'l-Bahá speaks of the sufferings of Jesus and talks to them about God's love for them and their sufferings. And it really touches the men. One of the most extraordinary things that Abdu'l-Bahá does is he gives long addresses to the people who come to visit him, several page addresses, but whenever Abdu'l-Bahá addresses the poor, it is always quite a short address. And he always gets to the food part rather quickly, or the charity part rather quickly. But he begins, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he begins by saying, "Tonight I am very happy, for I have come here to meet my friends. I consider you my relatives, my companions, and I am your comrade. You must be thankful to God that you are poor, for His Holiness Jesus hath said, 'Blessed are the poor.' He never said, 'Blessed are the rich.'" And likewise, in Abdu'l-Bahā's talks to the poor in the Bowery, in France, in that little hut that he went to at the Pensionnats that we saw yesterday, and in the 6 or 7 experiences with the poor he's going to have in London when he returns to England, Abdu'l-Bahá is always very loving, very informal, very friendly with them in a way he is not with other audiences. He is really himself with the poor. And so now we come to Abdu'l-Bahā's bag of quarters. This is another photograph of the men drinking free coffee at the Bowery in New York. The Bowery was a mission for unemployed men. So after the talk, Abdu'l-Bahá requests to meet each man. He is handed the bags of quarters, and Kate Carew asks what they are, and Abdu'l-Bahá replies with a little smile, "Some little lucky bits I am going to distribute to the men." All 400 men present will leave with a warm handshake from Abdu'l-Bahá and a shiny new quarter pressed in the palm of their hands. That would be about $7 in today's currency. And at the time, it would cover a roof over their head for that evening and enough for a few days to sleep and eat. So it was quite a generous amount of money in that time. This is the article. I'm going to read the title because I think it's really funny. It's a New York Tribune on April 20th, and it says, "Free money on Bowery. Abdu'l-Bahá visits mission and distributes quarters. Money bag soon empty. News spreads rapidly, but the Persian prophet has to disappoint many." I love how they put so much drama in something that was probably quite lovely. After New York, Abdu'l-Bahá visits his second large city in the United States, Washington, D.C., and gives an address at Howard University. This is Howard University class of 1912. And it is not impossible that at least one of the people here may possibly have attended Abdu'l-Bahā's lecture on April 23rd, 1912, because they were class of 1912, because it took place before graduation. So every opportunity, every moment, every window, every vignette, every scene, every interaction of Abdu'l-Bahá in the United States in 1912 is a teaching opportunity. He is the perfect exemplar at every minute of his existence. And on April 23rd, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks 3 times that day and attends various events. His first speaking engagement is at Howard University, an all-Black institution, and he gives this talk at noon. A band welcomes him, and more than 1,000 faculty and students attend Abdu'l-Bahā's address on racial harmony and the unity of mankind. There is a long article that you can download by clicking on this PDF, written by Dr. Christopher Buck, on Abdu'l-Bahā's 1912 Howard University speech, a Civil War myth for interracial emancipation. Then after all of these speaking engagements, or after Howard University talk, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the Khans. And this is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá in Washington, D.C. with the Ali Kuri Khan and Florence Khan. And they are the couple who invite him to lunch. So this is where he's going to dine with. See, he speaks to an all-black university where the thousands faculty and students present. And then Abdu'l-Bahá gets invited to an all-white luncheon with the Washington, D.C. elite. But it's not going to stay that way because Abdu'l-Bahá is involved. So 1 hour before the luncheon, Abdu'l-Bahá sends word for Louis Gregory, the first American Baha'i, African-American Baha'i, and asks him to come to the Khans for an interview. So this is Louis Gregory. Louis Gregory arrives at the Khan at the time when everyone's ready for luncheon. And the most active Baha'is in America are present, including the mother of Florence Khan, Alice Bede, Agnes Parsons, Helen Goodall, Ella Cooper from California, Edward Getzinger, Juliet Thompson, Mason Remy, and there are about 10 more people present, including Zia Pasha, the Ottoman ambassador, and several prominent figures in the social life of Washington, D.C. Luncheon is announced while Abdu'l-Bahá is still having his prolonged private interview with Louis Gregory. Abdu'l-Bahá leads the guests into the dining room while Louis Gregory waits for the chance to leave discreetly. But suddenly, Abdu'l-Bahá stands up, looks around, and says, "Where is Mr. Gregory? Bring Mr. Gregory." While Abdu'l-Bahā's attendant fetches Mr. Gregory, Abdu'l-Bahá very casually rearranges the place settings, which had been done a long time in advance and in strict accordance with Washington, D.C. social etiquette and protocol. And he just moves them around. And when Louis Gregory arrives in the dining room, the master makes a point of stating that he is pleased to have Mr. Gregory present and proceeds to give a talk about the oneness of mankind. When we started this series of talks on Abdu'l-Bahā's voyages to the West, he had made a point of saying that he had not come to follow their etiquette and their standards, but to raise Baha'u'llah standard. And this inviting Louis Gregory at the luncheon is a very, very good example of this. Abdu'l-Bahá is inaugurating the oneness of humanity because that is racial unity is one of the legacies of Abdu'l-Bahá to the American Baha'i community, something American Baha'is take very, very seriously. On the 1st of May, Abdu'l-Bahá is almost across the country. He's now in Wilmette near Chicago, and he's going to dedicate the temple. And this is a newspaper article that was published on January 7th, 1912. So 4 months before, they knew that he was coming. Abdu'l-Bahá had put Corinne True, a woman, in charge of the temple work at a time when women were seldom put in charge of anything. Corinne True will later be appointed a hand of the cause of God. So when Abdu'l-Bahá arrives on the 1st of March, 1912, he speaks inside a tent, and this is a photograph courtesy of the National Archives of the National Spiritual Baha'i Assembly of the United States. Inside the tent, 300 people or more are seated in a circle, trying to catch a glimpse of Abdu'l-Bahá. Inside the tent, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a talk on the vision of the future and spiritual meaning of the Mashriqul Asghar, the dawning place of the praise of God. And he says, "The power which has gathered you here today, notwithstanding the cold and windy weather, is indeed mighty and powerful. It is the power of God, the divine favor of Baha'u'llah, which has drawn you together. We praise God that through his constraining love, human souls are assembled and associated in this way. Thousands of Mashriqul Asghars, dawning points of praise and mention of God, for all religionists will be built in the East and the West. But this, being the first one erected in the Occident, has a great importance." This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá laying the cornerstone of the house of worship. They give Abdu'l-Bahá a golden trowel, very beautiful golden trowel. But when Abdu'l-Bahá uses it to break the ground, it's too flimsy. So Abdu'l-Bahá asks for a sturdier tool. And I love this story so much because Abdu'l-Bahá asks a young man to run across the street and get an axe. And then Abdu'l-Bahá, in his 60s, lifts that axe and swings it like a woodsman. The people who are there speak about his athleticism in swinging that axe to break the ground. And when he finally breaks ground, a shovel is handed to the master, and Karim True suggests to him that women should be included in the ceremony. And so Abdu'l-Bahá calls on Lua Getzinger and Karim True to dig up shovelfuls of earth. And everybody from all different races follows suit and dig up shovelfuls of earth. Then Abdu'l-Bahá places the foundation stone for the temple, a stone that a woman who had nothing to give, Nettie Tobin, she was too poor to contribute money, so she went to a Chicago construction site and took a reject stone and brought it to Wilmette in a baby carriage, 2 trains and a wagon once the baby carriage had collapsed. And it was that stones the builders had rejected that became the foundation stone. After laying the foundation stone, Abdu'l-Bahá declares the temple is already built. And so on that great afternoon in Wilmette, Illinois, a 2,600-year-old prophecy from Psalms, chapter 118, verse 22 has been fulfilled. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is a lovely photograph of a light moment in Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to Chicago. This is Abdu'l-Bahá visiting the Lincoln Park Zoo. Abdu'l-Bahá had the habit of walking in Lincoln Park whenever he visits Chicago. And before he leaves the city in May 1912, he goes to the zoo. And in Star of the West, Honoré Jackson tells us about this stroll with Abdu'l-Bahá. Near the lakeward side of the middle portion of the park is an unusually well-stocked zoological department. The many strange and beautiful forms of bird and animal life herein presented proved very interesting to Abdu'l-Bahá as he walked among them with a manner which reminds someone of the legends of Saint Francis of Assisi, who was famous for being in nature with animals, and the unconsciousness said to have been displayed by that lovable saint in his communion with the birds and the animals of his day. And it was here that Abdu'l-Bahá was moved to grant permission for the first pictures taken during this stroll, the occasion chosen being at a time when the cortege found itself grouped very conveniently for camera purposes between 2 lines of iron palisade. And of course, the variety of Abdu'l-Bahā's activities is amazing. He goes from expressing delight and wonder at the animals in the zoo to speaking at a very, very large congregation. This is a rare photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá actually speaking to a congregation. I mean, it's an amazing photograph. On his last day in Chicago, which is a Sunday, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a moving address at Plymouth Congregational Church in Chicago. The rector of this church, Dr. Joseph A. Milburn, has seen and heard Abdu'l-Bahá several times and is greatly attracted to the master. He summarizes the teachings for his congregation, and Abdu'l-Bahá speaks in his talk about the material and spiritual center of illumination, spiritual cycles of the physical sun and the sun of reality, a united world without war, the material and heavenly civilization. And he chants a prayer for the congregation in his melodious voice. People are so enkindled by their experience that they follow Abdu'l-Bahá out in their cars from one talk to another that day. And then Abdu'l-Bahá speaks in Pittsburgh on the 7th of May, and his arrival is announced in a newspaper. This on the left here is Rabbi J. Leonard Levy of Pittsburgh, who invited Abdu'l-Bahá. In order to speak to his congregation in Pittsburgh, Abdu'l-Bahá had to change his schedule, which is not something that was easily done because his schedule was very, very full. Over the last 2 days before coming to Pittsburgh, Abdu'l-Bahá had so many speaking engagements on May 5th, on May 6th, there may have been more meetings that we don't know about. You know, it's impossible for us to know exactly everything that Abdu'l-Bahá did. But he still made a detour to Pittsburgh specifically to honor Rabbi Levy's invitation and to speak on Tuesday, May 7th, 1912, at the grand ballroom of the prestigious Shenley Hotel to an audience of 400 listeners. Abdu'l-Bahá and Rabbi Levy share convictions. They're both advocates for interracial equality at a time when this is a very unpopular opinion. Rabbi Levy gave a lecture series at the Tuskegee Institute for 2,000 Black teachers in 1903. In 1904, he delivered the commencement address at the all-Black Howard University, where Abdu'l-Bahá has just spoken. And he invited in 1905 Booker T. Washington to preach inside the Rodef Shalom Synagogue. 7 years later, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks at Rabbi Levy's invitation and speaks on the teachings and principles of Baha'u'llah. You can find out a lot more on this visit by clicking on this link and going to Dr. Christopher Buck's article called Champions of Unity, Abdu'l-Bahá and Rabbi J. Leonard Levy. In mid-May 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks at the Lake Mohonk International Conference on International Arbitration. He was invited to this, and so he responds to the invitation. This is the foremost peace conference in America and has been held since 1895 at this absolutely heavenly looking place called the Lake Mohonk Mountain House, which is a hotel where Abdu'l-Bahá stays during the conference. When Abdu'l-Bahá arrives, he praises the stunning, breathtaking natural beauty, and the scenic grandeur of the landscape. During his 1-hour carriage ride from the station to the hotel, they drive through wooded hills, green valleys, woodlands, natural springs, and waterfalls. The most illustrious names of the peace movement at the time are present. I just made a little collage here of some of the illustrious participants. The two people, other than Abdu'l-Bahá, the two people who are circled in gold, who will hear Abdu'l-Bahá speak, have won the Nobel Peace Prize. One will win it in 1921, Dr. Christian Lang, and then one has previously won it in 1902. You know, so there's a justice of the Supreme Court, minister of Nicaragua, superintendent of schools, the 12th president of Columbia University, the founder of Lake Mohonk Conference, and a member of the United States House of Representatives. The conferences last 3 days with 2 long sessions on each day. On the second evening, Abdu'l-Bahá's name is at the top of the conference. And I went online and I actually found the report of the conference. And when I say at the top of the page, I mean at the top of the page, because see here in the bottom picture, on the bottom right, it says second session, the oneness of the reality of humankind by Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas of Persia. And then at the top, we have the address of Abdu'l-Bahá. And then this is just the cover. And then the one below here, yeah, somebody else mentions Abdu'l-Bahá and I just included that. So yeah, Abdu'l-Bahá's spiritual perspective on the oneness of mankind infuses kind of a new spirit into the conference and the delegates. And he widens the conversation by addressing the reformation of the whole world through the promulgation of the Baha'i teachings. And after his warmly applauded address, one by one, dignitaries of various countries come to shake his hand. And this is actually a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá at the Mohonk conference with Mirza Mahmoudi Zarqani and Lua Getzinger and Dr. Edward Getzinger. And Aminullah Farid, where is he? This is Edward Getzinger, Lua Getzinger. Aminullah Farid is right here. Amin Farid. And then Ahmad Sohrab is back there. And then Mirza Varga and Seyyed Asadullah, and Dr. Zia Baghdadi is on the edge here. And of course, Abdu'l-Bahā's participation in this conference is widely reported. These are just two articles. Head of the New Religion of Peace is picturesque figure at Lake Mohonk Arbitration Conference. Peace Conference enlarges circle. Delegates now embrace nearly every walk of life. Baha'i leaders talk. It's absolutely fascinating how much Abdu'l-Bahā is mentioned in the newspapers. It's really wonderful. It was just so much fun writing this and just seeing Abdu'l-Bahā's name in the papers over and over and over and over again. I mean, I think I must have collected 700 clippings, I think, something like that. And that's just a drop in the ocean. I mean, there's so many more. This is the story of the film of Abdu'l-Bahā, who I'm sure you've all seen now that the Universal House of Justice released it. It took place on the 18th of June, and it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story of perspective. I particularly love this photograph because Abdu'l-Bahā is actually smiling on it, which is extremely rare. And he's smiling and looking at this little African-American girl who's dressed so beautifully. And what I love the most about this picture is that all of them here, all of her older sister or another older African-American little girl here, then the other one, then this little girl here, this other little girl, and Abdu'l-Bahā and his beard, everything is white in the center of this picture, you know? It's just such an amazing picture. And then everybody just has these smiles on their faces like they just robbed a candy store, you know? It's so wonderful. Everyone's so happy. So when the story of the filming of Abdu'l-Bahā is really interesting because it's kind of a question of perspective. The Baha'is were looking at the situation short term, and of course Abdu'l-Bahā was looking at the situation long term. So shortly after Abdu'l-Bahā arrives in New York, a commercial movie company asks if they can make a short film for their newsreels, and Abdu'l-Bahā says, good, very good, very good. And the Baha'is become very upset and explain to him that this is going to be shown in movie houses. And Abdu'l-Bahā replied, Bis Yaqub, even better, wonderful. So on the day of the shoot, we don't know the exact date of this shoot. Abdu'l-Bahā appears in front of the Hotel Ansonia for the making of the short film. It's quite a powerful moment. Abdu'l-Bahā approaches the camera while imploring Baha'u'llah to bless this means for the spread of the heavenly cause through the world of God. And, you know, everybody making videos for the faith on YouTube now, including Clearwater, is maybe spiritual descendants of this blessing that Abdu'l-Bahā begged on behalf of Baha'u'llah for the medium of film. You know, we're all experiencing this together through the medium of film, and Abdu'l-Bahā blessed it when he arrived in New York. So Abdu'l-Bahā is not threatened by new technology, and he embraces it, and he perceived the power of the moving image before other people who were very scared of it when they were moving from silent films to the moving pictures in general. So I guess the Baha'is come around and decide to make a longer film. So the shoot takes place at the home of Mr. and Mrs. McNutt. This is a scene in the film. You see two different arrangements. This is Abdu'l-Bahā, and then the people are a little bit behind him, and then a closer up with the people around him. This is two stills from the movie. Some parts of the film are shaky, and Abdu'l-Bahā is not in the frame. But when he sees the film, and most particularly the final scene, he's very happy. The last scene of the film shows Abdu'l-Bahā's utterances coming forth with wonderful intensity and power. And it's also the day on which a record is made of Abdu'l-Bahā talking on an Edison talking machine. So the voice of Abdu'l-Bahā is recorded. And the latter part of the recording is Abdu'l-Bahā's voice is played during Baha'i pilgrimage in the Master's house. And you can read the Persian, and I think this is the Persian and the English of the authorized English translation and the provisional Persian typescript of the tablet chanted by Abdu'l-Bahā in Persian in the recording of his voice. So if you ever hear the recording of his voice, remember to come to the American part of the chronology, part 6, and then you can find it here. It's just a beautiful, I like the middle part, the last part where it says, glad tidings, the morn of guidance hath dawned. Glad tidings, the sun of truth has shone forth. Glad tidings, the breeze of favor hath wafted. Glad tidings, the shower of the clouds of divine bounty hath poured down. It must be absolutely beautiful in Persian. So I suppose Abdu'l-Bahā's main purpose in making the movie and the recordings is that they would become instruments for spreading the message of Baha'u'llah. And Abdu'l-Bahā himself says the greatest effect will be apparent in those coming years, long after the blessed subject himself has passed from this world. Consider what this means. The beloved friend 100 years from now will be able to see the form, face, and actions of the beloved center of the covenant. And I want to just reiterate that this chronology was written before the House of Justice released their movie. And this is exactly what happened, because when the House of Justice released their movie about Abdu'l-Bahā, they had colorized the movie, and the effect on the worldwide Baha'i community exactly 100 years after his passing was absolutely tremendous. That's all anybody could think about or talk about for a while. And Abdu'l-Bahā prophesied it. He said, the beloved friends 100 years from now will be able to see the form, the face, and actions of the beloved center of the covenant. I mean, this is a photograph that was taken in New York. I love this photograph. I love Abdu'l-Bahā holding his prayer beads. I love his hands. What I love the most is his turban, because it's so rare to see anybody having a photograph of themselves with a turban, but Abdu'l-Bahā always wore a turban. And the thing is, the turban acts a little bit like a halo. You know, it illuminates his face. It makes his eyes even bluer, and it's continued by his beard. So his whole beautiful face is framed by a white beard and a white turban. It just looks like he's haloed, you know? It's just so amazing. Wednesday, June 19th, 1912 is a very important day, because it's a day when Abdu'l-Bahā, the center of the covenant, speaks about the covenant in New York. Early in the morning, he calls Juliet Thompson to paint his portrait for their fourth sitting, and speaks to believers in the basement of Julie's apartment at 48 West 10th Street. Then sometime later that morning, Abdu'l-Bahā calls Juliet to begin painting. And they're sitting on, Lua Getziger is nearby sitting on a couch, and Juliet has begun to work, and Abdu'l-Bahā smiles at Juliet and says, "This makes me sleepy. What shall I do?" Juliet asks Lua, whose Persian is better than hers, to tell the master if he needs rest, he can paint. She can paint while he sleeps. But then Abdu'l-Bahā cannot sleep. And the master opens his eyes, and the room all of a sudden seems to the women like it's rocking in a ship in a storm. The master's eyes are blazing, and veils of glory, thousands of veils, have shriveled away in the flame, and Lua and Juliet are exposed to glory itself. Then Abdu'l-Bahā speaks to Lua, and Juliet hears the words, Munadi Ahd, herald of the covenant. Lua starts forward and her hands to her breast and says, "Man, I." And then Abdu'l-Bahā says, "Call one of the Persians. You have to understand this." And then Abdu'l-Bahā says to Lua, now it's being translated so she really understands what he means. "I appoint you, Lua, the herald of the covenant, and I am the covenant, appointed by Baha'u'llah, and no one can refute his word. This is the testament of Baha'u'llah. You will find it in the holy book of Aqdas. Go forth and proclaim, this is the covenant of God in your midst." After this extraordinary event where Lua Getzinger and Juliet Thompson witnessed the power of the covenant radiating from Abdu'l-Bahá, the master sends Lua, now the herald of the covenant, downstairs to the believers who have been waiting and instructs her to proclaim the covenant. A short time later, Abdu'l-Bahá himself rejoins the believers and speaks on the station of the center of the covenant, but he does not reveal the power of the covenant to the believers the way he has done when he was privately with Lua and Juliet. It is on this historic occasion that Abdu'l-Bahá reads the Surah-i Ghusn, the tablet of the branch, revealed by Baha'u'llah in Adrianople for the express purpose of unveiling the station of Abdu'l-Bahá. In this important tablet, Baha'u'llah makes several significant, earth-shattering statements about Abdu'l-Bahá, referring to him as a sacred and glorious being and a branch of holiness. These events are why New York is known as the city of the covenant. And there's going to be several more events about the covenant later on. Abdu'l-Bahá never officially said New York is the city of the covenant, but these events are tremendous. We have an extraordinary event now in West Englewood, now called Teaneck, New Jersey. This is the Unity Feast. This is a photograph of all the participants in the Unity Feast. And race unity was Abdu'l-Bahā's favorite topic in America. And he held unity feasts, two, I think, one in Washington and one in Teaneck, in April in Washington, and a second one on the grounds of Roy Wilhelm's house in West Englewood. This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá at Roy Wilhelm's house in Englewood, New Jersey. Abdu'l-Bahá changes trams 4 times to get there, rests at his home for a while. This is where the picture was taken, when a very nice picture where Abdu'l-Bahá is smiling and Lua Getzinger is serving tea. It's really lovely. And you can read on the website the full address of the Unity Feast, but Abdu'l-Bahá talks about a new day and where the sun of reality with its full effulgence will illumine us and the darkness of disagreements will disappear. Unity was Abdu'l-Bahā's favorite topic. This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá himself from the back, very rare photograph where you can see even him raising his hand and welcoming people to the party, to the Unity Feast. They have the Unity Feast, they have the dinner, the lunch in the shade of a grove of tall pine trees. And they eat a delicious meal of Persian rice, pilaf, polo, and then a delicacy, sherbet, a Persian drink, which is basically syrup, and sweets, and the green lawn is strewn with fresh flowers, which make it look like an embroidered carpet on which Abdu'l-Bahá walks in the fresh, clean air with a gentle breeze flowing, and he anoints the 250 seated guests with attar of roses on their heads. Abdu'l-Bahá agrees to have his photograph taken and is pictured in 2 groups. In one, he is seated in the rose garden with his Persian entourage, and in the other, he is pictured with American friends. One of the most extraordinary results of this meeting in Teaneck, New Jersey, is the kindled life of service of Martha Root, who was present that day. And she became a Baha'i in 1908. This meeting will be the high point of her unparalleled life of service. She will teach the Baha'i faith to Queen Marie of Romania, circled the planet multiple times, traveling to more than 20 countries before falling in her tracks in Hawaii as a hand of the cause of God. And this is our last photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá at the Unity Feast. I also really like this picture because he's in movement. And I feel like that's the most appropriate photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá. Because I always have a sense of him being constantly in movement, like an atom circling around his son, Baha'u'llah. Then, this is a wonderful section. This is a collaboration between myself and a very close friend of mine, Earl Redman, who wrote some extraordinary books in Abdu'l-Bahá in their midst. And we wrote this together. This is the 25th of July to the 16th of August, 1912 in Dublin. In Dublin. These are the books that Earl Redmond wrote about Abdu'l-Bahá. Visiting Abdu'l-Bahá, Volume 1, Visiting Abdu'l-Bahá, Volume 2. This is the final years. In the middle is Abdu'l-Bahá in their midst. So they're a trilogy, in a sense. And this is the source for this section. The information on Dublin came from this book. Agnes Parsons. This is Agnes Parsons. Agnes Parsons was a very wealthy socialite who first heard about the Baha'i faith in 1908 and became a Baha'i when she went on pilgrimage in 1910. And she asked Abdu'l-Bahá if he would ever stay in her house in Washington, D.C. if he came to America. But he not only stayed with her in Washington, D.C., he also stayed with her in her house in Dublin, New Hampshire. And this is where the story is today. Dublin, New Hampshire, the house of Agnes Parsons. This is Dublin in 1906, 6 years before Abdu'l-Bahā's visit. You see, it's one of those beautiful parts of America where the nature is really, really beautiful. And it was an artist colony in 1912 and very fashionable summer resort. Many rich and famous people had summer houses in the area, including George DeForest Brush, whom Abdu'l-Bahá meets. And Abdu'l-Bahá insisted during his stay there that all the bills associated with his stay be directed directly to him. He always paid everything and never accepted any kind of help from anyone to defray the cost of his travel. While he's in Dublin, the 30th of July, 1912, the story of the barefoot boy. While they're waiting for the train, at one point in Abdu'l-Bahā's stay, Abdu'l-Bahá suddenly left the group and strode over to a ragged and barefoot country boy who was standing between two carriages and said to him in English, "How are you?" The boy, unperturbed by his unusual conversant, replied, "All right." At this, the master laughed with great appreciation and promptly gave the boy a quarter. Suddenly, there were other boys before the master, all proclaiming they were all right, all right, all right, and each being rewarded with a quarter. I really have a feeling that Abdu'l-Bahá, he loved to provoke these little incidents because he just loved to laugh, you know? So he's so unpredictable, Abdu'l-Bahá, my Lord. I love it. No one can keep up with him. This is Abdu'l-Bahá, and then this is in front of the Parsons home with some of the friends. On one occasion, Mrs. Parsons had invited a group of 20 prominent people. Oh, they're very prominent. Culture, science, art, politics, achievement, industry, science, all well represented. And so Mrs. Parsons was really eager that the master tell them about Baha'u'llah. That's the point. She invited all these important people there so that they could be lectured to by the center of the covenant, son of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Bahá, and he was expected to perform. So instead, Abdu'l-Bahá encouraged his guests to tell stories, and everyone just had a great time, and they learned very little about Baha'u'llah. But I like, people trying to manipulate Abdu'l-Bahá. It never works. Just don't do it. On the 2nd of August, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá and the Equality of Women and Men. This is a photo of Abdu'l-Bahá, the group of Baha'is at Lincoln Park in Chicago. This group is largely composed of women and children. And this article below is one of the things that Abdu'l-Bahá will tirelessly promote, is the equality of men and women during his stay. And so the next day after that previous story, Abdu'l-Bahá was sitting with Mrs. Burton of Pasadena, California, Cordy Klein and Imogene Hogue, and they were watching Mrs. Parsons and some of her friends practicing golf on the lawn. And Abdu'l-Bahá remarked, "It is customary in Persia to say of one who is successful in a certain undertaking, he carried the ball out of the field. If many people attempt something and one is successful, it will be said, he carried the ball. Today, all the women of the world are striving to raise the banner of equality and establish the fact that women is the equal of man. But God willing, the American woman will carry this ball and thus demonstrate that God has created all humanity equal." The 4th of August, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahā's abiding passion for race unity. Oh, look at this photo. Oh, what a beautiful couple. Oh my God. This is Louis Gregory and Louise Matthews in 1912. Though most of Abdu'l-Bahā's time was spent with the rich, famous, and white people, he gave special attention to their Black servants, treating them no differently than their employers. On the 4th of August, Abdu'l-Bahá addressed a group of 28 Black people in Dublin and spoke of the importance of unity and amity between Black and white people. And he told them about the upcoming marriage of Louisa Matthews and Louis Gregory, a white woman and a Black man. The white people were amazed at the influence of the cause of Baha'u'llah. Let me see. And so they were married. The wedding was planned for the 27th of September in New York City, and the master would be in Denver, Colorado at this time. But the wedding took place at a Church of England Episcopal Church with 9 witnesses present, including the minister and his wife, and representatives of the Baha'i Spiritual Assemblies of New York. Now we come to a place that is very important to many of the people who listen to this. This is the Green Acre, this Baha'i school in Maine on the eastern seaboard of the United States, all the way in the north. This is a gorgeous photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá at Green Acre. I just want to point out, we're so lucky to have so many photographs of Abdu'l-Bahá doing the things we are looking at. It just makes it so alive. You know, we spent 4 whole parts talking about Abdu'l-Bahá and having illustrations that were not of Abdu'l-Bahá to illustrate events with Abdu'l-Bahá, you know. So now he goes to Maine, a picture in Maine. He goes to Green Acre, a picture in Green Acre. He goes to Dublin, a picture in Dublin, you know. He goes to Teaneck, a picture in Teaneck. Wonderful. So as Abdu'l-Bahá is making his way to Canada, he continues traveling north in America and arrives in Elliott, Maine, where 500 people are waiting for him on the grounds of Miss Sarah Farmer, who began offering gatherings at the former hotel resort on progressive topics. And I'm just going to show you slowly the subjects that Abdu'l-Bahá talks about. This is Abdu'l-Bahá and Sarah Farmer in a carriage, in a car actually, on the grounds of Green Acre. Gorgeous picture. And then these are the subjects Abdu'l-Bahá is going to talk about in Green Acre: rational proof, the station of man, the human body, the oneness of mankind, the worlds of God, elimination of racial prejudice. 20 talks. They read almost like a spiritually transformative curriculum. This is another photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá at Green Acre. By all accounts, the effect of Abdu'l-Bahā's talks was tremendous on people. They were so enkindled. Eyewitnesses recount that some sobbed, some fainted, some fell to their knees, and many were transformed and imbued with a new vision for their lives, which was really the purpose. Baha'u'llah has in-depth conversations with people who will become stalwart servants of the faith, many very well-known Baha'is and many people whose name we don't know. But still they went and served. Abdu'l-Bahá teaches the faith at every opportunity, counsels individuals all day long, and torches are lit in people's hearts at Green Acre that will burn for decades. On his last day, look at all these pictures of Abdu'l-Bahá at Green Acre. This is another one, and you see his translator here on the left. This is another photograph. Abdu'l-Bahá on his last day says, "We have finished our work here. We have sown a seed. Many souls have been attracted and transformed. Every day we have seen gifts such as fruit, flowers, honey, and sweets, which have been placed here anonymously and without show. This is a proof of the sincerity of their hearts." One of the most unforgettable people Abdu'l-Bahá meets in Green Acre is Fred Mortensen. Fred Mortensen grew up in a really tough neighborhood in Minneapolis, Minnesota, around the end of the 19th century, and adapts to his environment. He violated any law he needed to survive. And it's breaking the law that brings him to God. In Mortensen's story, he steals, he gets into fights with policemen, gets arrested, escapes from prison, is a fugitive for 4 years before stealing again. When he attempts to escape, he shatters his leg jumping over a 10-meter hall, and his defense attorney, Albert Hall, is a Baha'i. and teaches him about God's love and Baha'u'llah's blessings and teachings. For hours on hours on hours, Mr. Hall teaches his client about Abdu'l-Bahā's love for the children, and Fred Mortensen accepts his love, and his transformation is complete. He feels reborn and revivified. So in 1912, when Fred Mortensen hears that Abdu'l-Bahá might not travel to Minneapolis, he rides the rods. And this picture here is a man riding the rods. So they lie down on these horizontal platforms that are right next to the wheels and the rails. And it's very, very, very dangerous, because if you fall asleep and you slip, you can die. You fall and you get run over by the train. So riding the rods is deeply, deeply dangerous, and hundreds die and limbs get lost in the process every year in America. It's extremely hard to outlaw too, because you have to catch them and they get off as soon as the train stops. So Fred Mortensen arrives in Green Acre with his letter of introduction from Mr. Hall, covered in soot, obviously, and he tries to freshen up as best he can, and is the second in line to meet Abdu'l-Bahá the next morning after he arrives. And Abdu'l-Bahá welcomes Fred and asks Fred the only question Fred Mortensen does not want to answer. Abdu'l-Bahá asks him, "Did you have a pleasant journey?" This is another photograph of people getting off and on trains. Fred doesn't answer, looks at the floor. Of course, Abdu'l-Bahá, knowing that he's struck gold, repeats the question, "Did you have a pleasant journey?" And Fred lifts his eyes to gaze in the master's eyes, sparkling eyes that look into the very depths of his soul. And he knows and he sees that Abdu'l-Bahá knows already. So he has to just tell him anyway. "I did not come as people generally do who come to see you." "How did you come?" "Riding under and on top of the railway trains." "Explain how." Fred looks again into Abdu'l-Bahā's eyes, and they have changed. He feels like the light of love is pouring out of them now. And Fred is filled with happiness as he explains riding the rods to Abdu'l-Bahá. When he is done, Abdu'l-Bahá kisses him on both cheeks, gives him a large quantity of fruit, kisses his dirty hat, soiled by his arduous journey, and tells Fred Mortensen, "You are my guest." Abdu'l-Bahá gives Fred Mortensen fare for his journey back, invites Fred to remain and spend a week with him in Green Acre, then Malden, Massachusetts, riding in Abdu'l-Bahā's automobile. A few weeks later, Fred Mortensen will meet Abdu'l-Bahá again, and they are the words of a transformed, enkindled man, showing the long-lasting effects of Abdu'l-Bahá on a person's soul. "I left for home with the never-forgotten memories of a wonderful event, the meeting of God's covenant." I like how he says God's covenant, not God's center of covenant, God's covenant. "The branch of that pre-existing root, that wonderful moon that shall shine as the sun, the light of 7 days, and to whom we shall all bow and praise his holy name." Wonderful transformation. Now Abdu'l-Bahá leaves the United States briefly to travel to Canada for 10 days, between the 30th of August and the 9th of September. As you can see, Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival is publicized in the newspaper of the Montreal Daily Star. Apostle of Peace here predict an appalling war in the old world. Apostle of Peace is the name of 2 books written by Dr. Amin Ejea on every single newspaper article ever written about Abdu'l-Bahá. So really wonderful, wonderful work of love. And Abdu'l-Bahá stays at 716, which has now changed numbers. It's 1548 Pine Avenue in Montreal, the only Baha'i shrine in North America, the home of the Maxwells, the outside and the inside, the bedroom of Abdu'l-Bahá. After arriving in Montreal on August 30th, Abdu'l-Bahá is driven by Sutherland Maxwell to his home at 716 Pine Avenue. And Abdu'l-Bahá, upon entering the home, pronounces, "This is my home. All that is in it is mine. You are mine, your husband and child. This is my home." Yes, their child is his, because she will marry his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, and her name will become Maria Khanum. Abdu'l-Bahá stays 2 nights with the Maxwells before moving to the Windsor Hotel, but the Maxwell refers to the Sutherland dwelling as his home. He loves their child, Mary Maxwell, as his own. This is same photograph as above, but modern day. 1548 Pine Avenue, and it's written and engraved in stone at the outside, Baha'i Shrine, Sanctuaire Baha'i, in French and English. You know, it's not very well known, but actually Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to Canada in Montreal is the warmest reception he will ever receive in all of North America. No other city in America gives Abdu'l-Bahá the same media attention and warm reception that Montreal offers the master. He gives 7 well-attended talks during his stay, 4 of them in the home of William Sutherland and May Maxwell. 2,500 people will hear Abdu'l-Bahá speak in person, while another 440,000 people will read his words in the extensive media coverage he receives in 34 articles in 10 daily newspapers. He is very well reported, very well described, very fair, very accurate. Montreal is very exceptional. And they say in big letters in the newspapers, anyone can make an appointment with Abdu'l-Bahá. And during his visit, Abdu'l-Bahá crisscrosses Montreal on foot, by taxi, and by streetcar, visiting downtown Montreal, the East End, and Mont-Royal. He takes an advertisement and says any Montrealer who wishes to make an appointment with him can do so. He even pays for the advertisement himself. On the 3rd of September, he gives a talk on Baha'i economics for socialists, strikers, Marxists, and labor leaders. These are textile workers and their supervisor in the Wabasso cotton factory in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, around 1914. So it's a very technical talk, and Abdu'l-Bahá goes through, lays a foundation for a system whereby the most important class of society, farmers, achieve utmost welfare and well-being through a village community chest, which he calls a general storehouse. So he says that in every village there should be a general storehouse, which will have a number of revenues. The first revenue will be that of the tenths or tithes. The second revenue will be derived from the animals. The third revenue from the minerals, that is to say, every mine prospected or discovered. The fourth is whosoever dies without leaving any heirs, all his heritage will go to the general storehouse. And the fifth, if any treasure shall be found on the land, they shall be added to the storehouse. So Abdu'l-Bahá goes into very, very great detail in this talk about economics and where people can get money. Another of Abdu'l-Bahā's subjects in Montreal is very, very intense, is Abdu'l-Bahá raises awareness about the coming war. This is a French infantry charge in the First Battle of the Marne, which starts 2 years to the day after Abdu'l-Bahā's talk at St. James Methodist Church on September 6th. So on September 5th, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a talk warning about war, and 2 years to the day, war breaks out. One of the aims of Abdu'l-Bahā's journeys to the West was to warn people about the dangers of the coming world war, but of course no one listened, and the world war happened anyway. But Abdu'l-Bahá, just to a short excerpt of the types of things that he would tell people, is like beasts of prey, men are warring and killing each other, destroying cities and homes, devastating countries and kingdoms. The cause of bloodshed and battle, strife and hatred throughout the past has been religious, racial, patriotic, or political. Therefore, the world of humanity has ever been in torment. More war scenes. In Montreal, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a series of public addresses, informal talks, and private interviews. This is the Unitarian Church of the Messiah, where Abdu'l-Bahá spoke. This church opened its doors only 7 years prior to his visit in 1905. Abdu'l-Bahá, as I said, gave 8 public talks and 7 informal presentations, total of 15 talks in Montreal. And we have transcripts of 6 of these talks in the promulgation of universal peace. The links are on the website if you want to go there. He really worked very, very hard in Montreal. But here is a story of interracial marriage. East meets West. May and Mary Maxwell. Mary Maxwell is her young daughter who will become Ruhiya Hanum, and their story with Abdu'l-Bahá. When May Maxwell married Sutherland, she was already in their 30s, and they were indefatigable teachers of the cause. In late 1909, she was 39 years old, and she couldn't have children, and she was content with the will of God. But Abdu'l-Bahá, while she's on pilgrimage, tells her, this is not true. You can have children. Do you want a child? Shall I give you a child? May Maxwell replies, whatever you desire for me, that is all that I wish. As soon as she speaks these words, May Maxwell finds herself and the baby in the Holy Family that was, sorry, I forgot to mention that. There was a baby in the story. I skipped the line. And so as soon as she says, whatever is your wish, she finds herself, when she was holding a baby, she's grasped into the master's embrace. And Abdu'l-Bahá tells her, this is the reply of my own daughter. Be assured, be happy. I will pray for you. So in 1910, at the age of 40, she and her husband welcome Mary Maxwell into the world. And during Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to Montreal, Mary is a spirited 2-year-old. One day when Abdu'l-Bahá scoops Mary up to give her a kiss, she slaps him, and Abdu'l-Bahā's turban flies off his head. Mortified, May Maxwell asks how she should punish the child, and Abdu'l-Bahá responds, leave her alone. She is the essence of sweetness. After this little incident, Abdu'l-Bahá chases Mary around until he catches her, then wraps her up in his arms and gives her a kiss. On the memorable vignette is when Abdu'l-Bahá is resting one day and Mary is emphatically told, do not disturb the master. He is very, very, very tired, and don't you make any noise. Mary Maxwell shoots into the room, and Abdu'l-Bahá tells the rest of the lovely story. Today, I was resting on the chaise longue in my bedroom, and the door opened. The little girl, Mary Maxwell, came into me and pushed my eyelids open with her small fingers and said, wake up, Abdu'l-Bahá. I took her in my arms and placed her head on my chest, and we both had a good sleep. 25 years after they spent time in Abdu'l-Bahā's home, May and Mary Maxwell travel to the World Center and visit Shoghi Effendi. And now she becomes Amatul Bahá Ruhiya Hanum and officially becomes part of Abdu'l-Bahā's family as the wife of Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith. The Maxwell family is, in a sense, the highest of Baha'i royalty. May Maxwell is elevated to the rank of martyr when she dies, when she goes pioneering late in her life. William Sutherland Maxwell is posthumously elevated to rank of Hand of the Cause. Amatul Bahá is a Hand of the Cause, not only the daughter of a martyr and a Hand of the Cause, but the wife of the guardian of the Baha'i faith and a Hand of the Cause herself. Very special family. The United States, 9th of September to 5th of December, 1912. This is the last leg of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey. 9th of September, 1912, Oshawa, the Boy on the Fence. This is Jim Loft here on 1948, and this is the story of his life. Return to Tendinanga, the story of Jim and Melba Loft, Baha'i pioneers. This is the story of an effect that Abdu'l-Bahá had on untold number of souls wherever he went, and it's a moment that only lasted seconds on his 3-year journey to the West, but it's a powerful vignette because it serves to illustrate the magnitude of his spiritual power. On the afternoon of 9th of September 1912, Jim Loft, a 4-year-old First Nations Canadian boy from Tyendinanga, Mohawk territory, is sitting on a fence just outside the little town of Oshawa, Ontario, right next to the railroad tracks, watching the train rush past him. At about 3:30 in the afternoon, he sees a man wearing a long flowing white robe waving from the train, and overwhelmed, Jim Loft falls over the fence and onto the grass. This will be Jim Loft's earliest surviving memory. Jim suffers in the intervening years and often prays to ask for God's help, for inspiration to help him alleviate his poverty, oppression, and the alcoholism that plagued First Nations people. Exactly 19 years later, Jim marries Melba Witung, a Curve Lake First Nations Canadian. They become the first First Nation Canadian Bahá'ís, and Shoghi Effendi writes them a warm welcome letter. When he becomes a Bahá'í, Jim says, "Now I know who that old man was. It was Abdu'l-Bahá when he was in the country." This is a wonderful vignette about Abdu'l-Bahá in San Francisco. That's a collaboration with Charlene Magziader, who lives in San Francisco. On the 6th of October, 1912, the Unitarian Church, where Abdu'l-Bahá gave his first public address in California, have the outside and the inside. And then on the 11th of October, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá teaches Helen Goodall to consult in Sutro Heights. These are 4 pictures of Sutro Heights showing the entrance in Palm Avenue. Sutro Heights would be the westernmost point visited in America by Abdu'l-Bahá, and so the westernmost point he ever visited in his life. He has a conversation here with Helen Goodall where he asks Helen Goodall's opinion as to whether he should go visit northern cities or return to the east. And Helen Goodall says, Abdu'l-Bahá knows best what to do. But Abdu'l-Bahá says, I want consultation. This is not the way to consult. And he laughs. I ask your opinion. If it were my will, I would not have asked you. Mrs. Goodall says, Abdu'l-Bahá asks for my will. The believers in Persia have suffered so much. I feel as if Western believers have understood the situation, their sacrifices. It would mean far greater spiritual development for them if they would sacrifice their desires and give Abdu'l-Bahá to the Persian believers. Abdu'l-Bahá says, very good, very good. I want you to write this exactly to the believers, giving them the details. So he teaches Ella Goodall Cooper to consult, to not just say whatever you want. No, that's not consultation. Give me your opinion. On the 16th of October, 1912, the Feast of Ilm, Knowledge, held in Oakland at Helen Goodall's home. This is the celebration of the feast here, the photograph with someone holding the greatest name, and you see all kinds of people. There's Asians. Are there any? There were also a lot of African Americans in this community, and there's a really wonderful story about that as well. This is where Abdu'l-Bahá stayed in San Francisco at 1815 California Street, the residence of Abdu'l-Bahá in Chicago. Then Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the Golden Gate Park and sees the bisons. And when he sees the bisons, he says, these are the true philosophers, for they never get their heads above the earth. Ha. This is also not a donkey this time, but a bison. When Abdu'l-Bahá returns to the Holy Land, and he's in the middle of war and he's telling stories to the people in the Holy Land, he'll tell them, I didn't see a donkey when I was in the West. They don't have donkeys over there. He was trying to make them laugh, of course. Oh, and 8th of October, 1912 in Palo Alto, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks at Stanford University. I was born there. On October 12th, 1912, many prominent people visit Abdu'l-Bahá in San Francisco, and among them is Dr. David Starr Jordan, the president of Stanford University, so attracted to the teachings that he invites Abdu'l-Bahá to come and speak at Stanford University. 6 days later, Abdu'l-Bahá arrives and speaks to 1,800 students in the auditorium. Look how beautiful this auditorium is. It looks so organic. With 180 prominent Palo Altans. And Abdu'l-Bahā's address is extraordinary because it touches on intrinsic oneness of all phenomena, phenomenology, material organisms, cellular elements, the metabolic process, transference of energy, the augmentive value, atoms, cells, the laws and postulates of nature, the law of the survival of the fittest. But he speaks of these complicated subjects with ease and mastery of the most complex, high-level scientific concepts, and eventually weaves into them their logical conclusion that the teachings of Baha'u'llah, a work of art. This is just the opening. The greatest attainment of the world of humanity has ever been scientific nature. It is the discovery of the realities of things. Inasmuch as I myself find myself in the home of science, for this is one of the great universities of the country and well known abroad, I feel a keen sense of joy. Of course, yes, this is Abdu'l-Bahá in Stanford University. Beautiful picture, even though it's a little bit blurry, but still beautiful picture. And this is in the Palo Alto. Abdu'l-Bahá, the Baha'i prophet, speaks at Stanford University. A great assembly of students and teachers crowd the auditorium to hear the Baha'i prophet of Persia expound on the doctrine of a new day for a universal brotherhood and international peace and religious unity. Sketch of life of Abbas Effendi, the servant of God, reprinted from the London Chronicle. Oriental savant with entourage of 29 persons spent the day at Stanford University and are entertained in Palo Alto. I read it in like kind of like a sports announcer voice because that's exactly how it sounds. I love their articles. This is my favorite vignette of Abdu'l-Bahá in California. On the 10th of October, 1912 in San Francisco, Abdu'l-Bahá visits Charles Henry Tinsley, a black waiter laid up with a broken leg in his home. I've summarized this article. If you want to read it, please go to the chronology and click on the link below. And you can read the whole article on BahaiTeachings.org by Dr. Christopher Buck, one of the specialists of Abdu'l-Bahá in America. So perhaps no other story can really perfectly incarnate how at home Abdu'l-Bahá is wherever in the world that his feet may be walking in the present moment. So he acts the same in Budapest, New York, Paris, London, Ramleh, San Francisco, and Acre and Haifa. He is a friend. He cares for strangers. He helps the needy. He doesn't ask permission to do it. He doesn't let convention thwart him. He just helps them for hours and hours. This man pictured here is Charles Henry Tinsley, and he's a trailblazer. He was very passionate about theater, more specifically Shakespeare from youth. He had a drama club named after him some years after he began acting. And he is like actors today in LA. He is a waiter by day, so he earns money that way. But, and he discovered the faith by reading the iconic book Baha'i Proofs by Mirza Abul Fazl. And by 1906, he became a Baha'i. He was a Baha'i for 6 years when Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in October 1912. And after leaving employment of the Hearst family of Phoebe Hearst, he worked as a waiter and then was the victim of a hit and run. He is laid up in bed in San Francisco with a broken leg and other injuries. And one day, on October 10th, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá himself arrives at his home at 1247 and a half Webster Street in San Francisco. This is the dialogue from Star of the West article about his visit. Abdu'l-Bahá says, "How are you? I am very glad to see you. I'm well, accepting this broken leg, which has kept me in bed a long time. I'm impatient to be up and out to work for the Baha'i cause. You must not be sad. This affliction will make you spiritually stronger. Do not be sad. Cheer up. Praise to God. You are dear to me. I will tell you a story. A certain ruler wished to appoint one of his subjects to a high office. So in order to train him, the ruler cast him in prison and caused him to suffer much. The man was surprised at this, for he expected great favors. The ruler had taken him from prison and beaten him with sticks. This greatly astonished the man, for he thought the ruler loved him. After this, he was hanged on the gallows until he was nearly dead. After he recovered, he asked the ruler, "Well, if you love me, why did you do these things?" The ruler replied, "I wish to make you prime minister." By having gone through all these ordeals, you are better fitted for the office. I wish you to know how it is yourself. When you are obliged to punish, you will know how it feels to endure these things. I love you so, I wished you to become perfect. Even so with you, after this ordeal, you will reach maturity. God sometimes causes us to suffer much and have many misfortunes that we may become strong in his cause. You will soon recover and be spiritually stronger than ever before. You will work for God and carry the message to many of your people. More details in the article on Baha'i teachings. The link is in the chronology. Oh, and this, my friends, this is probably one of Abdu'l-Bahā's top 3 moments in the West, when he gets to talk at a Jewish temple, Temple Emanuel in San Francisco. Beautiful photographs of the outside and the inside of Temple Emanuel. Abdu'l-Bahá was invited by Rabbi Martin Meyer to speak at Temple Emanuel, and he stands inside the temple between 2 palm trees, a shaft of morning light bathing him in a glow in front of 2,000 Jews of San Francisco. The master is introduced by Rabbi Meyer, and Abdu'l-Bahá addresses a spellbound audience on the fundamental unity of religious thought, clearly demonstrating that the Prophet Muhammad is the upholder of Moses and Christ. Abdu'l-Bahá concludes his very long and very masterful address with a series of eloquent and momentous prophecies. The age has dawned when human fellowship will become a reality. The century has come when all religions shall be unified. The cycle has arrived when racial prejudice will be abandoned by tribes and peoples of the world. For all mankind shall dwell in peace and security beneath the shelter of the great tabernacle of the one living God. Profoundly moved, the huge audience pours out from the synagogue into the street, slowly dispersing back to their homes. Very, very soon, the effects of Baha'u'llah's words will be obvious, because the Christian church diagonally across from the temple is demolished, and the parishioners are left without a place of worship. And for the next 9 months, Rabbi Meyer and the Jewish community of Temple Emanuel offer their synagogue to the Christians every Sunday. And so Christians and Jews will worship under the same roof. This also is widely publicized in the newspapers. Persian heard at Temple Emanuel. Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas gives his message of the unity of religions. Abdu'l-Bahá travels to Los Angeles for one reason: to pray on the grave of Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i. On the top left is a picture of Thornton Chase in Egypt in 1907. Then there's a portrait of Thornton Chase, left column. And then this is Thornton Chase in the Temple Committee, and this is the grave of Thornton Chase seen from the side, and this is the grave of Thornton Chase in Inglewood seen from above. Abdu'l-Bahá will say, I love Mr. Chase very much indeed. His heart was pure. He had no other aim except service to the cause. He had no thought except the thought of kingdoms. Therefore, he was very dear to me. And at the threshold of Baha'u'llah, he was accepted. The blessed perfection has invited him to his kingdom. At this very moment, he is submerged in the sea of his bounty. Thornton Chase died on September 30th, 1912, a mere 3 days before Abdu'l-Bahā's train crossed into California on the evening of October 2nd, 1912. He was the first Baha'i in America. He was surnamed Tabit by Abdu'l-Bahā, meaning steadfast. And Abdu'l-Bahā pays Thornton Chase the honors of a king. He travels almost the entire length of the state of California, close to 560 kilometers, only to pay his respects at Thornton Chase's grave. When he arrives by tram to Inglewood Cemetery without asking anyone for directions, dignified and serene, Abdu'l-Bahā alights and walks straight to Thornton Chase's grave, praises the surroundings, spreads bouquets over the tomb, sanctifies the grave with so much love and affection that all those present are deeply moved. Then he turns toward the Holy Land and chants the tablet of visitation for Baha'u'llah, recites a prayer for the dead in Arabic, and gives an account of Thornton Chase's life. Abdu'l-Bahá will later say of Thornton Chase, this is a personage who will not be forgotten. For the present, his worth is not known, but in the future it will be inestimably dear. His sun will be ever shining, his star will ever bestow the light. At another meeting, Abdu'l-Bahá will say as many times as possible, at least once a year, you should make it a point to visit his tomb, for his spirit will be exhilarated through the loyalty of the friends, and in the world of God, it will be happy. The friends of God must be kind to one another, whether it be in life or after death. The friends of God must be kind to one another, whether it be in life or after death. This is now full circle back to the first story about the covenant. This is a second story about the covenant. This is possibly one of my favorite portraits of Abdu'l-Bahá. It was given to me courtesy of the United States National Baha'i Archives. It's an extraordinary photo. This is another story on the covenant in New York. On the 18th of November, 1912, at the Kinney's house, Abdu'l-Bahá puts Howard MacNutt through a severe and inevitable ordeal, testing his firmness in the covenant. For years, Howard MacNutt did not publicly mention his point of view, which was quite terrible, was that Abdu'l-Bahá was not anything special. He was just another disciple. So he kind of kept that secret, and Juliet Thompson thought he had gotten over his misconception. The week previously, Abdu'l-Bahá sent Howard MacNutt to Chicago with a message for the covenant breakers. Give up your association with Khairullah or be excommunicated, be cut off from the faithful believers. Howard MacNutt had written from Chicago, and he found that the Baha'is that he had meant to warn were angels, and he'd done nothing. So when he arrives at the Kinney's home on November 18th to see Abdu'l-Bahá for the first time after his unproductive trip, and Abdu'l-Bahá takes Howard into his own room, after some time they emerge and come out together in the hall. A very large crowd is gathered by then on the ground floor of the residence, and Abdu'l-Bahá tells Howard, go down and tell the people, I was like Saul. Now I am Paul, for I see. Howard MacNutt mumbles, but I don't see. Abdu'l-Bahá reiterates, go down and say, I was like Saul. Juliet Thompson pulls at his coattails and says, for God's sake, just go down. Howard MacNutt replies, miserable, leave me alone. Then Abdu'l-Bahá commands, go down. Howard MacNutt turns and goes down the stairs, and his back looking shrunken. He just looks like a shell of a person. Abdu'l-Bahá leans over the stair rail with his head thrown far back, his eyes closed in anguished prayer. Downstairs, Howard MacNutt speaks to the crowd, stumbling through his confession, unconvinced. When he returns upstairs, Abdu'l-Bahá, who had returned to his room, rushes forward to meet Howard MacNutt and embraces him and kisses him warmly and welcomes him with divine ecstasy, this broken man who, although he had been bewildered, has obeyed. Speaking of Howard MacNutt's chastisement the next evening, Abdu'l-Bahá sighs and says, I immersed Mr. MacNutt in the fountain of Job last night. So another story about the covenant in New York. I'm telling you, this is why we call New York the city of the covenant. 26th of November, 1912, a week after the last episode of the covenant in Howard MacNutt, Abdu'l-Bahá supervises the translation of the Suri-i-Husn. This is a very famous photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá. But you see how it's funny that he looks so much more rested than in this photograph. But they were not taken that far apart. Very, very interesting. His face is like the sky with clouds and the weather. It changes so sensitively. When Juliet arrives at the Kinney's house on the day of the covenant, November 26, 1912, she finds Abdu'l-Bahá on the upper floor of the house translating the Suri-i-Husn, the tablet of the branch, with a group of Persian and American Baha'is. Versions of the translations are repeatedly submitted to Abdu'l-Bahá as he directs the translation into English. himself with utmost sternness and great majesty. The translation is submitted sentence by sentence to Abdu'l-Bahá until he is satisfied with the rendering. To listen to excerpts from the Surah-i-Ghusn in the original Arabic with English subtitles, you can go to the YouTube channel of the Utterance Project, or you can click on this or find it on the website. This is a homework for you, homework assignment. This is, you can follow the footsteps of the Center of the Covenant in the City of the Covenant. This is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful numbered map of New York with everything you need to, oh, look at all this, look at all this, look at all this. Oh, God, look at all that. All those places. And you can download that here to read Abdu'l-Bahá in Manhattan by Kurt Asplund. It's just really wonderful. This is kind of how it looks inside. He found original maps and he points to the Church of the Ascension, the home of Juliet Thompson, and like across the street will be the street of Kahlil Gibran. This is West 10th Street, West 11th, West 12th. So this is just really wonderful. This is a work, a labor of love. And I just want to read the two quotes at the top here because I think they're kind of special. I have stayed a long time with you in New York. My stay in other towns has not been a tenth as long. Abdu'l-Bahá on December 2nd, 1912. I have attended more meetings in New York than in all the other cities combined. December 3rd, 1912. Love that. Love that, love that, love that. This is something to discover. Now, let me just, before I say something silly, we are very close to the end. I need another 5 minutes. So I found it very touching when I was reading through all of these historical documents, how often Abdu'l-Bahá was kind to the servants and to service staff everywhere he went. So I made a little compilation with pictures. New York, April 15th, 1912, Baha'is give Abdu'l-Bahá a large bouquet of very beautiful roses. The master in turn gifts the bouquet to a floor maid of the Ansonia Hotel, who walks by a group of Baha'is, her arm filled with buds. She explains, see what the master has given me? See what he gave me? Then in New York on the 16th of April, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá gives Juliet Thompson a bouquet of lilies of the valley. And when she leaves his hotel room, as she walks, the chambermaid stops her and says, did he give you those? He gave me some flowers yesterday, roses. I think he's a great saint. New York, 18th of April, Abdu'l-Bahá meets some of the chambermaids again on the way to Abdu'l-Bahá's suite in the Hotel Ansonia. Juliet has about 80 quarters left in her bag from Abdu'l-Bahá's wonderful donations at the mission. 80 quarters equals $20 at the time, which is $560 today. Abdu'l-Bahá asks the girl to hold up her apron, takes the bag from Juliet and empties its contents onto the maid's apron, gives her almost $600. Oh, see what he has given me. The girl says, I will do the same with this money. I will give away every cent. Abdu'l-Bahá says, if you give only words, when they put their hands in their pockets after you've gone, they will find themselves none the richer for you. So in Montreal, is 1st of September, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá knows how to give. So when the friends suggest calling a carriage, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a streetcar instead. He says, oh, it matters little. It saves expenses. There is a difference of $1 in the fare. And arriving at the Maxwells, the master gives £1 more than the carriage fare would have cost to each of the household staff. In Buffalo, New York, on the 12th of September, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá calls all his secretaries and attendants before him, and he's packed and ready. They prepare their belongings. And Abdu'l-Bahá makes sure to leave a $1 tip for his chambermaid with the hotel manager because she was not there for him to give it to her in person. On Glenwood Springs, on the 26th of September, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá returns to the hotel and says how nice it would be to eat in the gardens. So the party accompanying Abdu'l-Bahá is composed of 4 Persians and Fujita, who is his Japanese attendant. When Abdu'l-Bahá asks the waiter why there are only 5 chairs, the man replies, well, that man is your servant. Abdu'l-Bahá responds, that doesn't matter, make another place. It doesn't matter, make any difference, whether servant or different color, we are all one. He will sit here. And Fujita, you come here. In San Francisco on October 1st, Mirza Mahmoudi Zarqani remembers that during his journey to America every morning and after his morning devotions, Abdu'l-Bahá calls in all his attendants and serves them tea himself. Pleasanton, California, leaving the home of Mrs. Phoebe Hearst, the master calls in all the house staff, the maids, the orderlies, the cook, the butler, all stand in line before him, and Abdu'l-Bahá encourages them to be truthful, honest, and devoted to their work. Thanking them, he says, I am like a father to you. I wish to leave a memento with you. He gives each of the staff members 2 guineas, $10 in today's currency. And in Sacramento, on the 20th of October, 1912, addressing a large audience at the hotel, Abdu'l-Bahá takes time to speak with 3 chambermaids, anointing each of them with a violet water and giving them fruit. And in Edinburgh, Scotland, on the 10th of January, 1913, as they're about to leave the home of Jane and Alexander White, Abdu'l-Bahá has spent 4 days there. He asks to see the maids. When they're all gathered, he says, for the last few days, you have served me. I'm very pleased with you. I will never forget you. I will pray for you that you may become confirmed and assisted, that your heads will be crowned with diadems of glory. And he gives each 1 guinea, $5 in today's currency. And they're so overwhelmed, they all have tears in their eyes. So the moral of this story is tip the pizza delivery guy. Now is our last section. It's Abdu'l-Bahā's farewell to America. This is the Celtic, which Abdu'l-Bahá will take to leave New York. The last few days of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey in America are filled with tearful goodbyes from American Baha'is. And Abdu'l-Bahá had a very clear plan when coming on his journeys to the West, a spiritual agenda of the greatest importance. And we've collected here every farewell address of Abdu'l-Bahá, and I'm just going to read a few sentences from each. I have stayed a long time with you here in New York. I have met with you day and night, individually and collectively. I have conveyed to you the admonitions of Baha'u'llah, delivered to you the heavenly glad tidings, and explained to you the means of human progress. You must manifest complete love and affection towards all mankind. Do not exalt yourselves above the others, but consider all as your equals, recognizing them as the servants of God. Know God is compassionate towards all. If someone commits an error or wrong towards you, you must instantly forgive him. Do not complain of others. Refrain from reprimanding them. And if you wish to give admonition of advice, let it be offered in such a way that it will not burden the hearer. Beware, beware, lest ye offend any heart. We have sown some seeds and hope that the sun of favor will shine upon them. The rain of mercy will pour upon them, and the breezes of generosity will waft over them, because America has receptivity. My purpose is to explain to you that your duty is to guard the religion of God, so that none will be able to assail it outwardly or inwardly. I supplicate and I implore that the clouds of mercy may shower upon you and the sun of truth may shine upon you, so that you may attain to the purpose of the holy manifestations of God. This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá on the pier before boarding the Celtic. I am greatly pleased with you all and rejoice that you have shown me the utmost kindness and affection. It is my desire that Baha'u'llah shall be pleased with you, that you may follow his precepts and become worthy of confirmations. This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá arriving in America, still aboard the Cedric on April 11th, 1912. And I want to finish with just a last goodbye. Oh, sorry. Just a memory of one of Abdu'l-Bahā's highlights. This is the day of his departure. This is my last meeting with you, for now I am on the ship ready to sail away. These are my final words of exhortation. I have repeatedly summoned you to the cause of unity to the world and humanity, announcing that all mankind are the servants of the same God, that God is the creator of all. The earth is one native land, one home, and all mankind are the children of one Father. Your eyes have been illumined, your ears attentive, your hearts knowing. You must be free from prejudice and fanaticism, beholding the differences between the races and religions. And this is another homework for you, is to go and read all of these addresses, because I read about 10 sentences, but there's about 30 different addresses, I think. And the last one is maybe 3 pages long, so I couldn't read it in its entirety. I'm going to show you something a little bit extraordinary that is going to be a tradition here on the chronology of the extraordinary life of Abdu'l-Bahá. I made very, very big graphics with every single who's who important person that Abdu'l-Bahá met in every single country that he visited. And this is the first of these graphics. These are the prominent people who met Abdu'l-Bahá in America in 1912. And just look how big the graphic is. And every single one has a link to their Wikipedia page and a short bio at the bottom. So this is just amazing. I mean, there's so many people. He met W.E.B. Du Bois, Alexander Graham Bell, Rabindranath Tagore, Kahlil Gibran, Hudson Maxim, an American inventor, Andrew Carnegie. I mean, jeez, amazing. It just keeps going and going and going. And dear friend, you can also see the newspaper coverage video here. And that's it for today. Today, sorry it was so long. I just had to get it done because it was Abdu'l-Bahá in America. And most of you watching us are in America. Most of you watching us on YouTube are in America. So I wanted to give it to you in full. We have asked the people on YouTube if they want us to keep or discard the questions, and they want us to keep the questions. So we're not going to be closing the recording for the questions. Unfortunately, we have about 5-6 minutes left for questions because I went overboard. So please, if anyone wants to say something, you can unmute yourselves now.
Yes, everyone can unmute themselves. You can also raise your hand as well if you would like to do that.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat section asking me the lake where Abdu'l-Bahá went with the conference on arbitration. Was that Lake Mohonk? I didn't pronounce it, maybe I have an accent maybe, but it's Mohonk, honk, M-O-H-O-N-K. And I'm going to put the link to part 6, since there's several things in there that I didn't have time to cover. The list of the people. Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions?
Is Abdu'l-Bahá visit Philadelphia?
Oh, let me check that real quick for you. That's a very good question. Let me just check that real quick. No. Nope.
Because we have a house in Philadelphia that they said Abdu'l-Bahá was there.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, then I mean, it's not in the list of talks, and it's not in the promulgation of universal peace. Philadelphia. Okay, so Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in Philadelphia at 6 p.m. on Saturday, June 8th, and went straight to the Hotel Rittenhouse. On Sunday, June 9th, he drove to West 15th Street. So I'm going to actually put this in the chat, everyone. You want to read about Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to, I learned something today. Thank you very much for asking the question.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's very kind of you. I learned something I didn't know. Does anyone else have a question?
The 3 highlights that you said were that Abdu'l-Bahá had in America. You mentioned that, and I can't recall what those 3 highlights were.
Oh, wow. There's another really wonderful link here. Let me just put that in the chat.
I think
this is another link on Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to Philadelphia. You know, Joseph, can you get maybe closer to the speaker on your computer? Because I didn't hear the 3 what?
The 3 highlights.
I still can't hear. You're muffled. You're really muffled.
The 3 highlights.
What?
In America, the 3 highlights of Abdu'l-Bahá being in America.
Oh, no. I was just speaking just like this, just casually. I was just saying, like, after Abdu'l-Bahá leaves America, there's a couple of things that he talks about. He talks about laying the cornerstone of the temple in Wilmette. And he also talks about speaking in the synagogue. He speaks about that a lot. He's going to speak about that when he goes back to the Holy Land. It's one of the things, like, I guess
The
I
synagogue.
guess the context is important. You know that he's Middle Eastern and his ancestors were Muslim, and Muslims have persecuted Jews for so long. They've been rival enemies, kind of like he spoke about Jesus in a synagogue, and Jews and Muslims historically have not seen eye to eye. You know what I mean? So when he was in that synagogue, he not only spoke about Islam and Prophet Muhammad, but he spoke about Jesus Christ and Christianity. And he himself was a Baha'i. And it was just like for him, that speaking in a synagogue, first of all, it's very rare for people to be able to speak in a synagogue, you know, and he is not Jewish, you know, so that whole thing, Abdu'l-Bahá will speak about in England, in France, he'll speak about it in other places, he'll speak about it when he gets back to the Holy Land. This was definitely one of the highlights for him. And I just threw it out. I just said one of the top three. I was just kidding. You know, I was just, sometimes I do this. I joke sometimes.
You're talking about the one that was in California.
Yes, in San Francisco, Temple Emanuel. I'll write that in the chat. Temple Emanuel. That is a big deal. And you can read Abdu'l-Bahā's address at Temple Emanuel in Promulgation of Universal Peace. Let me just see if I can get you that here. Promulgation of Universal Peace. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question. Promulgation. Oh, there it is. Why is it up there? Okay, there you go. This is the Promulgation of Universal Peace. You can follow all of Abdu'l-Bahā's trips with that. Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Molly.
Yes.
We have someone here who has her whole family connection. All her daughter and granddaughter were named after Carrie Kinney, or your granddaughter.
No,
that's
my
really
daughter.
wonderful.
My daughter
That's
is
wonderful. I like that.
Harry, and son Edward after Edward Kinney. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
She shared much
so
about Abdu'l-Bahá, and it was just so exciting in my life. I was just came into the faith and attended her fireside. Oh, yeah, and she was pioneering in River Edge, New Jersey. And Shoghi Effendi gave her blessings to do so, and she was quite
wonderful
at that point in time.
Yeah. You know, it's really funny that you felt moved to share that you named your granddaughter after Carrie Kinney and son Edward, because I think that's kind of a wonderful way to listen to what Abdu'l-Bahá was saying. Remember when I read that sentence twice, that Abdu'l-Bahá said that we have to be kind with each other in life and in death? That was really moving to me. And I thought, wow, I don't think about that enough, you know? And when you name your kids after other people who have passed on, that's a way to keep the remembrance alive.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. That really has a direct link to the talk. Unfortunately, my friends, our Clearwater friends have a lot of things to do, and it's time to close the session. So we'll see you same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow for day 9. Love you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for being here.
Bye.